My name is Darlene Overton, and I am 71 years old. 3 days before my husband's will was read, at his own funeral, my daughter-in-law leaned across the casket flowers and whispered 6 words. "We've already decided about his estate." I nodded once. I smiled, and I told her the simple truth, that I had decided too, with the lawyer Walter hired in October. Her face went still. She had been counting on a tired old woman who signed wherever she was pointed. Walter had been counting on something else entirely. He saw the whole thing coming, and he sealed his answer inside one cream-colored envelope. 48 hours later, in a small office on Main Street, my son and his wife would learn how badly they had misjudged me. But the October none of them noticed has to come first. Welcome back to Quiet Strength Stories, where dignity outlasts cruelty, and the people everyone underestimates get the last quiet word. If a story here reminds you of someone you love, that is the point. Drop a comment, tell me where you are listening from, and subscribe so the next one finds you. The morning the doctor said pancreatic, Walter did not flinch. He thanked the man. He shook his hand. Then he walked me out to the truck in the hospital lot and held my hand across the bench seat like we were 19 again. We had been married 35 years. People in Hartwell thought of us as a match set. Walter cut wood. I cut paperwork. He could read the grain of a walnut board in 3 seconds. I could read a contract in 2. "How long?" I asked him. "Long enough," he said. He never cried, not once on that whole drive home. He started planning instead. I assumed he meant the burial, the headstone, the hymns he wanted sung. A practical man tidying his affairs. That was not the kind of planning he meant. He spent that first week at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, writing lists I was not allowed to see. When I came close, he would slide his arm over the page, gentle, almost playful. "Mind your own paperwork, Dar," he would say and smile. I let him have his secrets. After 35 years, you learn which doors to leave shut. I believed his lists were about dying, about a man getting his ledger straight before the end. They were about the people who could not wait for him to die. I should have looked harder at that yellow pad. I did not. I was busy being his wife, counting the weeks the doctor had given us, missing the quiet machine my husband had already begun to build one careful page at a time. Let me tell you about the mill, because the mill is the whole story. Overton Mill in Cabinet sits on 12 acres off Route 11, just south of Hartwell, Virginia. 38 people work there. Last year, it cleared a little over $7 million in custom millwork. Staircases, libraries, church pews, the kind of thing that outlives the man who built it. Every piece that leaves our floor carries a small brand burned into the underside. 2 letters. W and O, Walter's mark. By the front door there is a brass plate, green now at the edges, that I had made in 1990. It reads, Overton Mill and Cabinet, D&W Overton, founded 1990. D before W. I put it that way on purpose. Nobody ever noticed. Daniel noticed it least of all. He had walked past that plate 5 days a week for 20 years. To him, it was just the cold thing beside the door handle. He called the place Dad's shop. So did the bank. So did the men on the floor. I let them. For 20 years, I let every soul in that building believe my husband owned what we had built together. It was easier. It kept the peace. It made Walter proud to be the name on the truck, and I loved making him proud. I never minded standing behind him. I had built the standing behind myself, board by board, the same as the staircases. But a brass plate does not lie. It just waits for somebody to read it. 3 days after the funeral, in a lawyer's office on Main Street, somebody finally would, and the reading of it would empty a room. I should explain how a girl who took night bookkeeping classes ended up owning a mill. In 1990, Walter had the hands and the eye. He did not have a head for numbers, and he knew it. I had been keeping books for a furniture store in Roanoke for 11 years. We pooled what we had, his tools, my $4,000 in savings, and a loan I co-signed alone because his credit was thin and mine was clean. I am the one who filed the LLC. I signed the Articles of Organization. I structured the ownership the way the Roanoke lawyer advised to protect the family if a customer ever sued us over a staircase that gave way. In 1995, when we bought the 12 acres, I put the deed in my name, not in secret. The clerk recorded it downtown like any other deed. It is a public record. Anyone could pull it for $8. Nobody ever did. I ran the contracts. I handled the bank. I sat across from every supplier who tried to squeeze us, and I did not blink. Walter built beautiful things. I built the thing that let him build them. None of this was hidden. It was simply unread, the way people never read the label on a bottle they have poured from their whole lives. Paperwork was my second language. Most days it sat quiet in a gray filing cabinet, dull as dust, and I was glad to leave it there. There would come one Tuesday in November when that filing cabinet was the only thing in the world that could speak for me. And when it spoke, the whole family would finally have to listen. Daniel married Bridget 11 years ago in our backyard under the maple Walter planted the day Daniel was born. Bridget is 39, sharp and pretty and tired in a way that started long before she ever met us. She talks about the kids' future, the way some people talk about the weather, constantly, and with a low dread running underneath every word. I understood the dread. Her father died when she was 12. He left no will. His own mother, Bridget's grandmother, took the house, the car, the savings, and set Bridget and her mother out on the curb with 4 black trash bags. She told me that story once, early on, crying at my kitchen sink. I held her. I meant every bit of it. So I knew, even then, what drove her. Not greed, exactly. A girl who has been put on a curb will do almost anything to make sure she never stands on one again. Daniel is 43. Walter's boy from his first marriage, soft where his father was solid. I married Walter when Daniel was 8 years old. I am the only mother the boy remembers, and I never once thought of him as anything but mine. Though there were people in this family who would remind me, when it suited them, that I was not his blood. He grew up certain the mill was his birthright, the way a child is certain the sun comes up. That spring, before the diagnosis, Bridget began saying one particular thing at Sunday dinner. "Mom, you've earned a rest," she would tell me, patting my hand. "Let the next generation carry it." It sounded sweet. It sounded like care. It was the most polite way anyone has ever told me to disappear. I would smile and pass the potatoes and say nothing. I have learned that a sweet knife is still a knife. I just did not yet know how soon she planned to use it, or how deep. October is when the quiet drive started. Walter was still himself then, clear-eyed, walking on his own, losing weight but not yet the man the cancer would make of him. 3 or 4 times that month he would take the old Ford into town and come back 2 hours later with nothing in his hands and a look on his face I could not place. Once I found a thick cream-colored envelope on his workbench. Heavy stock, the kind that costs money. I picked it up. It had no name on it. "That's mine," he said from the doorway, not unkindly. I set it down. By supper it was gone. "Walter," I said, "what are you doing out there in town?" He poured his coffee. He took his time about it. "I took care of the paperwork," he said. "When Ruth calls, you listen to her. Listen to all of it before you say one word." I had never heard the name Ruth in my life. "Who is Ruth?" "Somebody who works for us now," he said, and that was the end of it. I thought he meant the insurance, the burial policy, the beneficiary forms, the dull business of a dying man. I even felt a little hurt that he had done it without me, after 35 years of me doing all of it. So I let it go. I had weeks to count and a husband to keep comfortable, and 100 small mercies to manage every day. I was wrong about the insurance. I was wrong about a great many things that October, and the cream-colored envelope I set back down on his bench would not surface again until it was the only thing left that could save me. By November, the cancer had its hands on him. He could not manage the stairs. He slept more than he woke. The mill ran without him, and for the first time in 35 years, it ran without me too, because I would not leave his side for anything. That is when Bridget made herself useful. She set up a calendar on the refrigerator. Visiting hours, she called it. She managed who came and when so Dad can rest. She managed me right along with everyone else. "You're exhausted, Mom," she would say, steering me toward the kitchen with a hand on my back. "Go lie down. I've got him." Carol noticed it before I did. Carol Tennant was our hospice nurse. 58, 30 years on the job with eyes that did not miss much. She began to linger. She began asking me small, careful questions about who was in the house and when. One afternoon, I came up the hall and heard Bridget through the bedroom door. "He needs quiet, Mom, not paperwork." I stopped. I did not go in. I stepped back from that door, and I want to be clear about my reasons. I would not turn my husband's last weeks into a war. That was a decision I made with my eyes wide open. It cost me more than I can say, and given the chance, I would make it again. But stepping back is not the same thing as giving up. I lay down in the spare room like a guest in my own house and stared at the ceiling. Down the hall, behind a door I had agreed not to open, my daughter-in-law was already carrying in the paper she planned to bury me with. Walter died on a Thursday, just after 6 in the morning. I was holding his hand. The room was gray with first light and very quiet. I will not dress it up. He was there, and then he was gone, and the house grew bigger and emptier in the space of a single breath. I had perhaps an hour of pure grief. Then the machine I had not known about began to turn. By noon, Bridget was on the phone in my kitchen, talking low. By the next morning, she spoke about the estate, the way you speak about something already settled and signed. Daniel would not quite meet my eyes. There was a paper, I gathered. Something Walter had signed. They mentioned it the way card players mention an ace they are holding under the table. The funeral was set for Saturday. The will reading, Ruth's office said when they called, would be the following Tuesday. The night before we buried him, Carol caught me alone on the porch. She had come by with a casserole she knew I would never eat. "Darlene," she said quietly, "there is something you should know about the night they had him sign that paper." I waited. "Not here," she said, glancing at the lit kitchen window where Bridget moved behind the glass. "After the service. You will want to hear all of it, start to finish." 3 days to the will reading. 3 days for a family to spend money they did not have on a mill they did not own. But first we had to bury him. And first, at the front of a crowded church, my daughter-in-law had something she could not wait to whisper in my ear. We buried Walter on a bright, cold Saturday, the kind of day he had always liked best. The church was full. 40 years in one town fills a church. There were men from the mill in their good shirts, suppliers, the pastor who had married us, half of Hartwell. I stood at the front beside the casket. Bridget came up next to me to pay her respects, which meant standing where the whole room could see her grieving. The flowers smelled too sweet. Lilies always do. She leaned in close, her mouth near my ear, her face arranged for the crowd into something soft and sad. "We've already decided what happens to his estate." 6 words. Quiet enough that only I heard them, spoken over my husband's body with the lilies crushed sweet between us. I have been underestimated my whole life. I have learned not to argue with it in the moment. So I did not argue. I nodded once. I smiled. The small, polite smile I had worn at 1,000 church functions. Then I told her the truth. "So have I said, with the lawyer he hired in October." I watched it land. Her face, so carefully arranged, came apart at one corner. The eyes first, then the mouth. She had not known there was a lawyer. She had not known about October. She had thought she was whispering to a beaten woman. "What lawyer?" she said. It was not a question. It was a small, dry sound, the sound of a plan developing a crack. The organ started up. The pastor raised his hands. I turned back to my husband and left her standing there with the lilies and the very first real fear she had felt all week. The will would be read in 3 days. She had exactly that long to wonder what her dead father-in-law had done to her in the daylight. After the service, the church basement filled with coffee and ham and low talk. Marcia found her audience by the dessert table. Marcia is Walter's younger sister, 69, a woman who has spent her entire life certain that blood is the only thing that truly counts. She loved her brother. I will give her that much. Her eyes were red and her grief was real. But she had been listening to Bridget for weeks, and Bridget had been very busy. "It's a shame, really," Marcia said, just loud enough to a knot of cousins near the cake. Darlene isn't even blood. The mill should go to family, to Daniel, to the children. A few heads turned toward me. I was 10 feet away, holding a paper cup of coffee I had no intention of drinking. "Blood takes care of blood, Darlene," she said, turning to face me directly now, her chin up. "You understand that. You'll do the right thing by Daniel." The room got a little quieter. This is how it is done in small towns, not with shouting, but with a sentence set down in front of witnesses, so the pressure has somewhere to spread. I could have told her about the deed, about the LLC, about 1990. I did not. I took a small sip of the bad coffee. "I'm sure we'll all do the right thing," I said. Walter usually saw to that. Marcia did not know what to do with a calm answer. She had come armed for a fight, and a fight needs two. I let her keep her weapon. Silence is an answer too, and mine was the only one that would still be standing on Tuesday. So I let the whole room believe, for a few more days, that they were watching a quiet widow lose everything she had. The paper came out 2 days before the reading at my own kitchen table. Bridget brought it in a folder, the way you carry something precious and a little dangerous. Daniel hovered behind her. Glenn was there too, Bridget's brother, leaning in the doorway with his arms crossed over his chest. "We didn't want this to be a surprise on Tuesday," Bridget said, sliding the folder toward me. "Dad made his wishes clear before he passed." Inside was a single typed page. "Last wishes," it said at the top, in a plain font. Below that, a few sentences leaving the mill and the house to Daniel. At the bottom, Walter's signature, shaky, but his. And 2 witness lines, Bridget's name, Daniel's name. I read it twice. I kept my face exactly where it was. I have signed 1,000 contracts in 35 years. I have caught errors that save this family more money than Daniel will ever know about. I knew, before I finished the first sentence, exactly where this page was broken. But a woman who shows her cards at the kitchen table is a fool. "That's Walter's signature," I said, true enough. Bridget relaxed half an inch. "So you understand, it's settled." "I understand that it's signed," I said, and slid the folder back across the table to her. Glenn smiled from the doorway like a man who had already spent the money in his head. I gathered up their coffee cups. I washed them at the sink with my back turned. And I said nothing at all about witnesses or about what the law thinks of a will signed over to the very people who held the dying man's hand to the page. That part was for Tuesday. In a room with a lawyer in it and a brass plate's worth of truth waiting in a cream-colored envelope nobody at my table knew existed. Daniel came back that night, alone, which was rare. He found me on the porch in the dark, the way he used to come find me when he was small and could not sleep. He sat on the step below my chair, the way he used to sit then, too. For a while, neither of us said a thing. The mill hummed in the distance. "We run a night shift in the busy months. You always handled everything," he said finally. His voice was not steady. The bills, the bank, Dad's moods, all of it. I never once had to think about it. "That was the idea," I said. "I guess I just figured it would come to me." He looked down at his hands. The shop, the house. I never even asked how it was set up. I just assumed. There he was, my boy, 43 years old, and for one breath he was 9 again, telling me the truth before anyone had taught him how to stop. I almost reached for him. I almost told him everything right there on the dark step. Then his phone lit the porch blue. Bridget's name on the screen. He looked at it. He looked at me. He answered it. "Hey, yeah, I'm just..." He was already standing, already turning away. "I'm coming now." He went down the steps and across the dark yard with the phone to his ear, agreeing with everything she said into it. My son was still in there somewhere. I had seen him for a second, clear as anything, but he had chosen, a long time ago, whose voice he would answer when it called his name in the dark. It has never once been mine. So I sat alone on the porch a while longer, and I made my peace with what Tuesday was going to do to him, because he had chosen that too, without ever knowing he was choosing. Let me stop here for just a moment. If you have ever been the quiet one in your family, the one everyone assumed would simply go along, the one whose work turned invisible the second it was finished, then you already know the weight I carried out of that church. Stay with me. What Walter left waiting for me out in that workshop is about to change everything I thought I had lost. And if any of this is landing close to home, subscribe so the rest of it finds you. The Monday before the reading, I made myself walk out to Walter's workshop. It is a small building behind the mill, his private place, where he kept the projects that were only ever his, the good chisels, the wood he would not sell, the radio that only ever caught one station. I went out there to feel close to him. I found something else instead. On his workbench, dead center where I could not possibly miss it, sat a cedar box. He had made it himself. I knew the joinery the way I knew his handwriting. It had not been there in October. He had built it and left it for me to find at exactly this moment. My hands shook a little when I lifted the lid. Inside, on top, was a letter from a law office. Avery and Associates, attorneys at law. An engagement letter, the kind you sign to hire someone, dated October 14th, signed by Walter in his good, steady October hand. Ruth Avery, so that was Ruth. Beneath it was a folded note in his own block printing, the careful capital letters he used for measurements. Dar. When Ruth calls, listen to everything before you speak. Don't tip your hand. Trust the dates. I love you. W. The cream-colored envelope from October had not been insurance. It had never once been insurance. I sat down on his stool and held the cedar box on my knees and let myself cry. Finally, in the one place left in the world that still smelled like him. Sawdust and machine oil and the cedar he had milled with his own hands. Then I read the note one more time. Trust the dates. My husband had been dead 4 days, and he had just handed me an instruction across that distance. And I have always, in 35 years, followed Walter's measurements down to the 16th of an inch. Ruth Avery called that same evening at 6 o'clock sharp. Her voice was older than I had pictured, steady, careful with every word the way the very good lawyers are. Mrs. Overton, she said, your husband asked me to call you the day after you found the box. Did you find the box? This afternoon. Good, he guessed Monday. A small pause. He thought of everything, your Walter. I have rarely had a client think so clearly so fast, and I have done this 40 years. She told me plainly what Walter had done. In October, while he was clear-headed and strong enough to drive himself, he had hired her. He had signed a new will and set up a trust. And there was, she said, a sealed letter as well. In his own words, to be opened at the reading and nowhere else. He was very specific, Ruth said. Nothing comes out early. Not the will, not the letter, not a single word from you. You let it all happen in the room, with everyone present. He was firm about that. Why? I asked. He said you would understand. He said the people who do this kind of thing in the dark should have to answer for it in the light. I closed my eyes. That was Walter, straight down to the bone. What do I do until Tuesday? I asked. Nothing, Ruth said. You grieve. You let them talk. You let them get comfortable. Then we will let the reading do the talking for all of us. I hung up the phone. I sat in the quiet kitchen a long while, the cedar box on the table in front of me. For the first time in many weeks, that night, I slept all the way through till morning. I think I finally understood that I was not, after all, walking into that room alone. The discovery about Glenn came that same Monday, by accident, the way the worst things always seem to. I had gone back into the mill office to pull a file, force of habit, a woman steadying herself with paperwork. Our bookkeeper, Janet, was at her desk, and she looked up at me like someone who had been waiting 3 weeks to say something out loud. Mrs. Overton, she said. I didn't know who to tell. Daniel had been in twice that week, she said, asking her to pull the mill's equipment values and the account statements. He had told her he would be taking over soon, and he wanted to know what the machines could be borrowed against. That was the part that turned my stomach. But it was the reason he wanted them that Janet had pieced together. There was a loan, $48,000, taken in September. Not the mill's money. Glenn had no claim on the mill's credit, and neither did Daniel. This was a personal note. Glenn had borrowed it for Marsh Contracting and talked Daniel into co-signing, with Bridget's name written right under his. 3 of them on the hook for it. Marsh Contracting was 3 months behind on its own debts and sinking fast. That is when the whole shape of the thing came clear to me at last. They had not just wanted the inheritance, they had already borrowed against it. Glenn needed Daniel to own the mill so there would be something solid standing behind that note. Bridget needed the control of it. Daniel needed to please the both of them. The $48,000 was a clock, and it was running. Does anyone else know about this? I asked Janet. Just me and now you. Keep it that way until tomorrow, I said. Tomorrow it won't matter who knows. I drove home past the brass plate by the front door. D before W founded 1990. I will be honest with you the way I have tried to be honest about all of it. By the time I pulled into my own driveway, I had stopped dreading Tuesday. I had begun, quietly, in a way I am not entirely proud of, to look forward to it. A woman can only be told to rest so many times before resting starts to sound like a dare. Monday night, Bridget tried one last time. She came alone, which told me she thought she could close the whole thing herself. She sat down at my kitchen table like a woman who already owned the chair. Mom, she said, I want to make tomorrow easy for everyone. That's kind of you. If you would just sign the mill over to Daniel tonight, we skip the whole circus. No lawyers, no drama. Family handling family, the way Dad wanted. She slid a paper across the table toward me, another typed page, another tidy place at the bottom for my signature. We already decided, Mom, she said softer now, but there was a thread of steel running under the softness. Don't make this ugly. There it was again. We already decided. She had said it over the casket. Now she was saying it over my own table. She liked the phrase. She believed it was a fact, the way she believed the sun came up. And if I don't sign it? I asked. She let the silence do the threatening first. Then she spoke. The children adore you. It would just break my heart if they saw less of their grandmother. Travel is hard. Schedules fill up so fast at their age. So that was the leash she had brought. The grandchildren. I looked at the page. Then I looked at my daughter-in-law, who had been put on a curb at 12 years old and had decided, somewhere in there, that the only safe place left in the world was standing on top of everyone else. I'll see you tomorrow, Bridget, I said and stood up to clear her cup. She gathered her unsigned page and her purse, and she left believing she had tightened a screw. She had no idea she was only winding her own clock. One more tick toward the room where signatures and dates decide everything, and a soft voice does not have to rise to win. After Bridget left, I called Carol. It was time to hear all of it. She came over with tea this time instead of a casserole. We sat in the dark living room with the television off, and she told me about the night they had him sign. It was the second week of November, Carol said. Late, after 10. You'd gone to lie down. Bridget had practically walked you to the bedroom door herself. I remembered that night. I remembered being so tired I could barely see straight. They came in with a paper, Carol said. Bridget and Daniel. And Bridget asked me to step out of the room, said it was family business. I told her I was his nurse and I would be staying. So she got the son to ask me instead, and I stood out in the hall. How was he? I asked. Walter. Carol's jaw tightened. Medicated, in and out, he did not have a steady hand and he did not have steady eyes. He signed where she put his hand on the page. She looked straight at me. Darlene, he kept asking for you, the whole time. Where's Dar? Get Dar. And she told him, I heard it clear through the door. She told him you had gone home for the night. In your own house, down your own hall. Something cold and clear settled into me then. Not rage. Something far more useful than rage ever was. Would you say all of that tomorrow? I asked. In front of the lawyer, in front of all of them. Carol set her tea down on the table. Darlene, she said, I have been waiting 3 weeks for somebody in this family to finally ask me that question. I met Ruth Avery in person on Tuesday morning, an hour before the others were due, in her office above the hardware store on Main Street. She was small and gray and exact, 70 if she was a day. We understood each other inside of a minute. 2 women who had spent their whole lives reading what men signed without bothering to read. She laid the law out for me plainly, so I would know exactly what was coming. Your husband's October will has a revocation clause, she said. It cancels every prior will and any informal document. He signed it before 2 independent witnesses, my paralegal and a notary. It is airtight. And their paper? The bedside one. Ruth almost smiled. A will witnessed by the 2 people who inherit from it. In Virginia, that is nearly the textbook definition of undue influence. It revokes nothing. It barely qualifies as paper. She did not show me the sealed letter. It stayed in a cream-colored envelope in her safe, the very one Walter had touched in October. At the reading, she said, when she caught me glancing toward the safe. He was firm about it. Everyone in the room hears it, or no one does. And the mill? I asked. The mill, Ruth said, is the part they understand least of all. But that is for the room, too. She stood and walked me to the stairs. Sit in the back, Mrs. Overton. Let them talk first. Let them get all the way comfortable. Then let me do my job. I went down the wooden stairs to the street where the hardware store was just opening, and I waited for my family to arrive and crown themselves. Ruth had offered me a choice before I left her office. I can call them this morning, she said. Tell them privately that the bedside paper is worthless, the will is ironclad, and the mill was never theirs. It would save everyone the scene. Some clients prefer that. I thought about it for a moment. It would have been kinder in a way, quieter, more like the woman they all believed I was. No, I said. Ruth waited. For 20 years they talked about my husband's shop and my husband's money and the family name, I said, and they did the worst of it in the dark. At a bedside with a man who could not hold his own pen, they put me out of the room. So you want the room? I want the room, I said. Not to shout. I have never once been a shouter. I just want the truth said out loud one time with everyone there to hear it said. After that, they can do whatever they like with the rest of their lives. Ruth nodded slowly, like I had passed a test she had given to a great many people who had failed it. I won't fight in hallways, I told her. I'll answer in the room where it counts. Your husband said almost exactly that, she said, in October, word for word nearly. That stopped me on the top stair. 35 years married, and we had still landed on the same sentence from opposite sides of the grave. I went down to the street, an ordinary Tuesday in Hartwell, except for the 11 people about to gather upstairs and find out who I had been the entire time. I was not the only one who had been busy. Bridget had spent the whole weekend telling people the mill was Daniel's. She told the cousins, she told 2 of the floor managers, she told Marcia, who needed no encouragement at all. She treated the Tuesday reading like a coronation. She had asked relatives to come to support the family. She wore a new navy dress. She had her hair done. One of the cousins, a decent man named Pete, told me afterward what she had said when he happened to mention the old brass plate by the door, the one that reads, D and W. Overton. Oh, that old thing, Bridget had laughed. Walter just put both their names on it to be sweet. You know how he was about her. To be sweet. 35 years of contracts and deeds and bank meetings and co-signed loans, and she had folded all of it down into a husband being sweet to his little wife. She had no idea that the brass plate was the single most honest thing in this entire story, that it had been telling the plain truth, out in the open, beside the front door handle since 1990. That was the thing about Bridget. She was so certain she was winning that she never once read the room she was standing in. People who are certain stop checking, and a person who stops checking will walk straight into a door they helped to install. She walked into that lawyer's office Tuesday morning at the very front of the pack, smiling, ready to be crowned in front of everyone she had invited. I came in last. I sat in the back, and I waited. Before we step into that office, let me say one thing. The papers Walter signed in October were never really about money. A mill, a house, 12 acres. He could have argued about all of that while he was still alive, and he never did. What he signed was about respect, about a woman the whole family had quietly agreed to overlook. If anyone has ever told you that being patient makes you a doormat, stay for this last part. Subscribe, and let us finish it together. Tuesday, 10 in the morning. Ruth Avery's office. I wore a plain black dress and Walter's watch, too big on my wrist. I carried the cedar box he had built me. The sealed letter had been locked in Ruth's safe since October. Walter had carried it to her himself, the same week I caught it on his bench. All the box held now was his handwritten note, the one that told me to trust the dates. I carried it anyway. It still smelled like his workshop. Holding it was the closest thing left to holding his hand. Carol came with me and took a seat by the wall. 11 of us filled the room. Daniel and Bridget up front, of course. Glenn beside them, restless, jiggling one knee. Marcia and 2 cousins. A floor manager who had worked for me 20 years and did not yet know it was me he worked for. Ruth behind her desk with 2 folders and 1 cream-colored envelope squared neatly in front of her. I took the chair in the very back, beside the door. Bridget glanced at me at the little wooden box on my lap, and she almost laughed out loud. A widow clutching a sentimental box. Harmless. Already beaten, in her mind. "You can come sit up front, Mom," she said, generous now in her victory, with family. "I'm fine right here," I said. "I like to see the whole room. I always have. You see more from the back. You see who looks at whom, who is nervous, who is already spending money that was never theirs to begin with." Bridget turned to face the desk, her chin up, ready for the crown. She had chosen the front row, fitting, I thought, and folded my hands on top of Walter's box. She would be the very first one the truth reached when it crossed that room. Ruth Avery folded her hands and began. "Thank you all for coming. We are here to read the last will and testament of Walter James Overton. Actually," Bridget cut in, "before you start, there is something you should see first." She stood. She walked her single-typed page up to the desk and laid it down like a winning hand at cards. "Walter made his wishes very clear before he passed," she said, turning so the whole room could hear her. "This is signed, and it is witnessed. The mill and the house go to Daniel. I think this saves us all a great deal of time and heartache." A few of the cousins nodded. Marcia said, "That's right." Glenn leaned back in his chair, satisfied. Ruth looked at the page over the top of her glasses for exactly 3 seconds. She did not pick it up. "Thank you," she said. "I will address that document in a moment. Please sit down, Mrs. Overton." Something in how she said it, flat, unimpressed, the way you would speak to a child interrupting adults, put the first real crack in Bridget's confidence. She sat. Ruth opened the first folder. Then she opened the second. Then she set the cream-colored envelope to one side, where every person in the room could see it, and she left it sitting there like a closed door nobody had the key to. "Let us begin," she said, "with the will Mr. Overton executed in this very office, on October the 14th. Bridget's head turned sharply toward me. I kept my eyes on Ruth. The clock on the wall ticked. The room had gone very still. Ruth began to read. Ruth read in a clear, even voice, the way you would read a recipe out loud to someone across a kitchen. She read the date. She read Walter's full legal name. She read the line that names the executor of the estate, me. A small sound went around the room at that one word. Then she reached the clause and she slowed down, so that not one person could claim later they had missed it. "I hereby revoke all prior wills and codicils and any other document purporting to direct the disposition of my estate." She looked up over her glasses, signed October the 14th, witnessed by a notary and by my paralegal, neither of whom inherits a single dollar from this man. The room was silent. I spoke then, from the very back, quietly. I did not stand. I did not raise my voice one notch. "We've both decided, Bridget," I said. "His decision is dated." Her head snapped around. The navy dress, the careful hair, the coronation she had invited a whole family to witness, all of it stopped working at once. "That's not—" She turned to Ruth. "That cannot be right. He signed ours in November, after this one. That makes ours the newer one." "We will come to November," Ruth said. "A later one wins!" Bridget's voice climbed a full step. "Everyone knows that. The newer paper always—" "Mrs. Overton." Ruth's tone did not move an inch. "Sit down, and I will explain exactly what a later paper has to be before it counts for anything. You are going to want to hear this part very carefully. Bridget sat slowly, as though the chair had shifted underneath her. Daniel had gone white. Glenn had stopped leaning back, and I held Walter's cedar box on my lap and waited. "Here's the law," Ruth said, in plain English. She held up the typed page Bridget had brought in. She held it by one corner, the way you would hold something that was not quite clean. This page was signed in November. That part is true, but a will only counts if the man signing it understood it and chose it freely, and if its witnesses do not stand to gain from it. She read the names off the bottom. This one has 2 witnesses, Bridget Overton, Daniel Overton, the very 2 it makes rich. She set it back down on the desk. A dying man, heavily medicated, witnessed only by the 2 people it enriches. In Virginia, a will like that does not survive a challenge, not on capacity and not on undue influence. It revokes nothing. The October will controls. "He wanted us to have it," Bridget said. "Did he?" Ruth said. It was not a question. I spoke once more, still seated, still quiet, still in my kitchen table voice. "He hired a lawyer in October," I said. "You handed him a typed page in the dark." The room heard it. Pete the cousin looked down at the floor. Marcia's mouth had come open and stayed that way. Then Carol stood up from her chair against the wall. "I was his nurse," she said. "I was there the night they had him sign that. They put me out in the hall. He was medicated. He kept asking for his wife, over and over. They told him she had gone home." She looked directly at Bridget. She was asleep down the hall, in her own house. You could hear the building's furnace kick on. Nobody else in the room made a single sound. Ruth let it all sit a moment longer. Then she reached over and picked up the cream-colored envelope. "Mr. Overton," she said, "left a letter. He asked me to read it aloud." Ruth opened the envelope with a brass letter knife. The paper inside was the heavy cream stock I had held in his workshop in October, a lifetime ago. "He wrote this the same day he signed the will," Ruth said. "He asked that it be read aloud in full with everyone present. These are his words, not mine." She began to read. "If you are hearing this, then I am gone, and the people I am related to are sitting in a room trying to take what was never theirs to take. I am sorry, Dar. I should have stopped it sooner. I was a coward about my own son for far too long." The room did not move. I want to be clear, because clear is the only thing that matters now. Ruth turned the page over. "I signed what they put in front of me. Then I drove to Ruth's office the next morning." Daniel made a sound low in his throat. Bridget stared straight ahead at the wall. I knew what I was doing in November. Bridget put a paper under my hand and I let her, because I was tired and I wanted the noise to stop. But the next morning I got in the truck and I signed my real will clear-headed in daylight with 2 strangers watching, so that no living soul could ever say I did not mean every word of it. Ruth read on gently. "Everything I own goes into a trust that Darlene controls. Not because she is my widow, because she built that mill with me, board by board, for 35 years, and the only thing I ever did wrong by her was let the whole world call it mine." I had not cried at the funeral. I cried then, quietly, in the very back of the room, with his cedar box resting on my knees. "Read the brass plate by the door," Ruth finished. "It was always true, as Walter." Ruth let the letter rest on the desk. Then she moved to the part Bridget understood least of all. "Now, the mill," she said. "Overton Mill and Cabinet is not a sole proprietorship. It never was. It is a limited liability company, formed in 1990. She slid a document across the desk where they could all see it. Mr. Overton held 45%. That share now sits in the trust that Mrs. Overton controls. The other 55% has belonged since 1990 to Darlene Overton herself. She is, and she has always been, the majority owner of this company." Daniel's mouth opened. It's Dad's company. It's always been Dad's." "It is your mother's company," Ruth said, "and the 12 acres it sits on are deeded in her name alone, recorded downtown in 1995. $8 at the courthouse would have told any one of you. that 55% and that land were never Walter's to give to anyone. Not in October, not in November, not ever. She looked around the room. What Walter could leave was only his own, his 45% of this company and the house, which was titled in his name. The paper they carried to his bedside was a fight over those, and those alone. Under the October will, both pass into the trust your mother controls. So Daniel inherits no part of the mill and no part of the house. What Daniel has is a job, on land his mother owns. Bridget came up out of her chair. "This is insane." Her voice cracked the whole room open. "She manipulated him, a dying man. We will sue. Daniel, tell them. Tell them we are going to sue." She was not crying for Walter. She was crying for the $48,000 and for the curb she could already feel rising up under her feet. Daniel said nothing at all. He was staring at the LLC document on the desk, like a man who had just learned he could not read. I stayed in my seat in the back. I let her shout. The truth had been said out loud once, with everyone present. That was the only thing I had come into that room to get. Bridget kept shouting. Something about lawyers, about elder abuse, about how I had planned every bit of this. I let her run all the way out of road. Then I stood up, slowly, an old woman with a small wooden box, and the room turned to face me. I did not raise my voice. I have never once needed to. "Bridget," I said, "sit down." She sat. Even now the quiet worked where all her noise never could. "You can keep the word family," I said. "Use it as much as you like, but you will not be keeping the company or the house or the land. None of it was ever on the table. You simply could not see the table you were standing at." I turned to my son. "Daniel, you have a job at the mill for as long as you want one, but you will apply for it again, in writing, to me, like every other man on that floor." "Mom," he started. "In writing," I said. I looked over at Glenn, who had gone gray as ash. "And that $48,000 is yours, Glenn. Yours and Daniel's and Bridget's. The 3 names on the note. Not $1 of it touches this mill. You borrowed against something that was never going to be yours." Then I picked up the cedar box, and Walter's watch slid loose down my wrist, and I walked out the front of the room for once in my life, past Bridget, past the lilies somebody had carried in, out into an ordinary, bright Tuesday morning in Hartwell. I did not win with anger. I never once raised my voice above the tone I use at the kitchen table. I won with dates, and with signatures, and with a man who loved me enough to plan it all in the daylight. The aftermath was quieter than you would think. Most things are, when the paperwork underneath them is sound. The bedside page was withdrawn. Ruth's office made certain it never reached a courtroom. The October will went through probate without a single valid challenge. Bridget hired a lawyer of her own. He told her exactly what Ruth already had, that a will signed by a medicated man, witnessed only by the people it enriched, loses on both capacity and undue influence, and that pressing it would only put her own conduct at that bedside in front of a judge. She dropped it inside a month. The $48,000 stayed exactly where they had signed it. On Glenn, on Daniel, on Bridget, every one of them personally. The mill never owed a cent of it. Glenn lost Marsh contracting by spring. I did not lend him a dime, and I sleep just fine. Marcia stopped coming to the house. She sends a card at Christmas now, signed only Marcia, and I set it on the mantel without much feeling either way. The trust holds everything, exactly the way Walter built it. I run the mill myself these days. The brass plate by the door still reads D&W Overton, founded 1990, and lately people have actually started to read it. They had already decided what would happen to his estate. That was the part Bridget kept saying, over the casket, over my own kitchen table, like it was a settled fact. They had already decided. They just decided wrong. Daniel's letter came 3 weeks later. It was typed, 1 page, formal, the way I had asked him to make it. "Dear Ms. Overton," it began, and I will admit that the Ms. Overton did something to my chest. He listed his experience like a stranger applying off the street. He asked to be considered for his old position. He came in alone to sign the new paperwork. No Bridget. He read every line before he signed, twice, slow, his finger moving under the words the way mine always had. We do not talk much. The thing that broke between us does not mend in a single season, maybe not in years. But he reads the contracts now. He asks how the books look. Last week, he caught an error on a supplier's invoice before I did, and he was almost shy about telling me. The door is open for the man who reads the paperwork. It is not open for the boy who simply assumed. That is as far as I will go. It is as far as he has earned. And it is further than I ever thought we would get. Patience isn't surrender. Sometimes it's just the sound a quiet woman makes while she waits for the truth to arrive on paper. That's my story. One whisper at a funeral, one envelope marked October, and one quiet woman they all should have remembered. If it nudged you to update your own will today, take that as your sign. Comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.